Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Shaddoll Yugioh deck profile for September 2023. Wanted to update the pure Shaddoll deck. I've always been a fan of the deck since it was released from the Duelist Alliance booster set, and with it I just wanted to keep as much of the pure playstyle of the Shaddoll deck that you're meant to do, with all of the many different fusion plays, and with the potential to run cards like Super Poly in the deck as well. Making resources out of your opponent's monsters is definitely one of the best aspects that you can do with the deck, with all the many different attribute Shaddoll monsters we also have available to run in the deck. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the main deck monsters. For the 3-ofs for our Shaddoll monsters, 3 copies of Shaddoll Wendy. For its flip effect, which if you didn't know, Shaddolls have card effects, scent effects, and then also flip effects. So depending on which one you activate, you can only use one Shaddoll effect per turn, and only once that turn, so you have to choose which one you want to use for all of your many different Shaddoll monsters. For Shaddoll Wendy, for its flip effect, you can special summon one Shaddoll monster from your deck in face up or face down defense position, except for Shaddoll Wendy. And if it's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can special summon one Shaddoll monster from your deck in face down defense position, except for Shaddoll Wendy. You can only use one Shaddoll Wendy effect per turn, and only once that turn. So you have that setup, and then just more special summoning power from your deck, depending on if you were to flip Shaddoll Wendy or even just send it to the graveyard by a card effect. You have all of these plays available to you thanks to this monster setup. And for the other 3-of that we run for the Shaddoll monsters, 3 copies of Shaddoll Squamata. For the flip effect, you can target a monster on the field and destroy it, but the main effect that you'll use with Squamata is if it's sent to the graveyard by a card effect. You can send one Shaddoll card from your deck to the graveyard, except for Squamata. You can only use one Shaddoll Squamata effect per turn, and only once that turn. So it's just more graveyard setup. Sending one Squamata means that you can then send an additional Shaddoll monster, setting up more and more for you to utilize in your graveyard for some of our other cards, by having the option for banishing cards like our Shaddoll Schism to then go for other fusion summons depending on what we sent off of Squamata to begin with. And then for the 2-ofs for the Shaddoll monsters, 2 copies of Shaddoll Hedgehog. For the flip effect, you can add one Shaddoll Spell or Trap from your deck to your hand, which can be useful if you fully utilize it. Being able to add cards like Shaddoll Fusion or our El Shaddoll Fusion to make use of in our hand. And if it's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can add one Shaddoll monster from your deck to your hand, except for Shaddoll Hedgehog. So either way, you have a plus depending on what card effect for Hedgehog that you use. You have a Spell and Trap search or a monster search, just if you either flip it up or send it to the graveyard by a card effect. For more of the destruction plays, we're also running 2 copies of Shaddoll Dragon. For the flip, you can target one card your opponent controls and return to the hand, so the bounce capabilities can definitely help to get around some pesky monsters they may have on the field that have benefits from either being destroyed by battle or a card effect. And if it's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can target one spell or trap on the field, destroy it. You can only use one Shaddoll Dragon effect per turn, and only once that turn. So you'll have a destruction or a bounce effect depending on what you use. Once again, for this Shaddoll monster, Dragon just helps for the spell and trap destruction as well, because your opponent could have a spell or trap that could prevent your Shaddoll monster from remaining on the field, or one that they want to utilize during the battle phase, which Dragon can help to take out before you proceed to the battle phase. And also 2 copies of Nail Shaddoll Ariel. For the flip effect, you can target one of your banished Shaddoll monsters, special summon it in face down or face up defense position, so it makes use of the recycle power you would do with cards like Shaddoll Schism. And if it's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can target up to 3 cards in the graveyards and banish them. You can only use one Nail Shaddoll Ariel effect per turn, and only once that turn. So the banish from our opponent's graveyard, especially utilizing a trap card to be able to go for the fusion play, and also for our other cards like our El Shaddoll Fusion to send Ariel to the graveyard, means on our opponent's turn we can also have that banish effect that could disrupt any of the plays they may have been trying to do from their own graveyard with any of their monsters. And I also run 2 copies of Shaddoll Falco. For the flip, you can target a Shaddoll monster card in your graveyard except for Falco and special summon it in face down defense position. And if Falco is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can special summon it in face down defense position, meaning that you have another monster to make use of, since if you use Falco for a fusion play, you then have the monster to then summon back onto the field, to then flip up again, to then have another special summon of one of your monsters, keeping your resources going. With the last of the 2-ofs for our Shaddoll monsters, being 2 copies of Shaddoll Beast. With its flip effect, you can draw 2 cards and discard 1, but the main play you'll want to use with it is the sent to the graveyard by a card effect play, just being able to draw 1 card. So even if you use it for just a fusion from the main deck to the graveyard with cards like Shaddoll Fusion, you'll still be getting the draw 1 off of this card, preventing you from fully minusing from any of your cards, or just, getting a plus as well, since with Shaddoll Fusion, you're able just to send all your monster resources from the deck to the graveyard, so you'll get your fusion monster and make up for the actual spell itself. With the last of our Shaddoll monsters being the 1 copy of Shaddoll Hollow. With this card, flip, you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, send 1 Shaddoll monster with the same attribute from your extra deck to the graveyard. If you do, banish that monster. And if this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can send cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard equal to the number of different original attribute monsters on the field. So you have different Shaddoll monsters to be able to summon out, depending on the attribute from the extra deck. So that just helps for that setup. It's more of a tech choice of mine to run the 1 Hollow in the deck as well for more of the setup of our different monsters, and then also being able to take out our opponent's monsters depending on the attribute we have. With the other non-Shaddoll monsters that I run the deck being 3 copies of Mathematician. When it's normal summon, you can just send 1 level 4 or lower monster from your deck to the graveyard, and when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can draw 1 card. So going first, it definitely does help, because you can send cards like your go-to Shaddoll Falco, and when you send Falco to the graveyard by card effect, you can set it back up on the field again, having your 2 monsters needed for a fusion play. Since Mathematician is an Earth attribute, you can use it to summon out cards like El Shaddoll Shekinaga, one of your more powerful fusion monsters, onto the field also. And then also with this card, when it's destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you just have a draw 1. So if you have to leave it on the field, at least you have a plus if your opponent does attack over it. With the last of the main deck monsters also being 3 copies of the Trickstar lineup, 2 Performage Juggler and 1 Trick Clown. The search power you have with Damage Juggler, and then just being able to use all of these monsters to summon out cards like El Shaddoll Construct, gives you benefits, because then you have the special summon of Trick Clown onto the field. If you send Damage Juggler, you can banish it for its own search effect, and also being able just to discard this card, so if Damage Juggler is in your hand, to prevent any battle damage, and then the pay 1,000 for Trick Clown just to be special summoned out onto the field gives you more resources if you were to send it to the graveyard for a fusion summon. And then for our hand trap, just the 3 copies of Effect Veiler. This is more or less just so you have another light target if needed for a construct, if you run through all of your Performage engine for another one, and just another good hand trap to use against your opponent. If you wanted to run Ash Blossom, you could always try taking this card out for 3 copies of that card. You do have the Performage engine to use for your light targets for construct. This is just an added backup choice for the hand trap spot and for that additional monster. For our spells, we are running 3 copies of Shaddoll Fusion. You fusion summon 1 Shaddoll Fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. If your opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, you can also use monsters from your deck as fusion material. So all the simpler if your opponent goes first and they have an extra deck monster, for you then just to activate this card and then send the needed requirements for any of your fusion plays to the graveyard to then get out your needed Shaddoll monster to go up against your opponent. If you go first, your main play is to get out the Shaddoll Winda, because then you'll have a lockdown of your opponent only being able to special summon 1 monster per turn, so they really have to make that summon count. And then you have the recycle power of your fusion monsters to add your Shaddoll's power traps back to your hand also. Now, some of the cards I've been mixing around numbers with is the next lineup. I don't know if they're going to do anything with super polymerization on the next ban list, or if they might have done something at this point as well. So if it has happened, you can just run the 3 El Shaddoll Fusion to replace the other super polymerization in the deck. El Shaddoll Fusion is just a quick play option to fusion summon, so you can even use it during your opponent's turn as that resource. You can only activate 1 per turn, but it's also useful in the multiple attacks where you can attack with your Shaddoll monsters, then activate this card and go into another fusion monster using those monsters you have on the field. Super polymerization at least allows you to use your opponent's resources. If you wanted to use this card, if it's not going to be affected by the ban list, you can keep in the 3 3 El Shaddoll Fusion and take out the next 3 of that I'm running just as more of a meta choice. So you go up against a lot of different decks in the current format, with that card being Book of Eclipse, which is nice because you change all face-up monsters on the field to face-down defense position. During the end phase of this turn, change as many face-down defense monsters your opponent controls as possible to face-up defense position. Then your opponent draws cards equal to it. So this can help to interrupt your opponent's plays, but at the same time also set your Shaddoll monsters back face-down for you to reuse when your turn comes around. Your opponent's monsters will be the only ones to flip face-up, so you won't be able to activate your own Shaddoll monsters, but you will be able to do so during the following turn. And like I said, this is just in case your opponent has an interruption monster on the field to then flip it face down and not have to worry about it while you do your own plays. And then also the 1 copy of Foolish Burial and the 1 Call by the Grave to finish off the spell lineup for the main deck. And for the traps, I run 2 copies of Shaddoll Schism. During your main phase, you can fusion summon 1 Shaddoll fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing the fusion materials listed on it from the field or graveyard, but cannot attack directly. Then you can send 1 to the graveyard, 1 monster your opponent controls with the same attribute as that fusion summon monster. So very useful for the fusion play, just because you have the attribute at choice in your extra deck to then match up with your opponent's monster and get rid of that monster potentially as well. You only use this effect of Schism once per turn, but you have all these plays available to you in the form of a fusion play, once again on your opponent's turn, by using those graveyard monsters from the extra deck by banishing fusion materials from the graveyard. It can't attack directly, but really not a big problem with some of our other cards. And the 1 copy of Shaddoll Core, just as another special summon option, but also for if summoned this way, it can substitute for 1 fusion material listed as an attribute. So if you were to go for any other card, it can make up for that specific attribute of your Shaddoll monster. For the extra deck, I run 2 copies of El Shaddoll Construct, probably one of the more powerhouse monsters in the extra deck. It must first be fusion summoned. If it's special summon, you can send 1 Shaddoll card from your deck to the graveyard. At the start of damage step, this card battles an opponent's monster, and it's a special summon monster. Destroy that monster. And if it's sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 Shaddoll spell or trap in your graveyard, add to your hand. So recycle power for any of the Shaddoll cards we run, but also since it must first be fusion summoned, if you have some other special summon cards on the field to make use of, you can also use the play of cards like Shaddoll Falco to flip and summon your construct from the graveyard back into the field and then just flip it up again the following turn to have a bigger boss monster to use. I also run 2 copies of El Shaddoll Shekanaga, more of a monster effect negation card in the deck and more of a defensive play. You have the Earth attribute to use with either your Shaddoll Core or the Mathematicians we run in the deck, or if we have the Super Polymerization play to use our opponent's own Earth monsters to make this card. And also the 1 copy of El Shaddoll Winda, the 1 copy of Cologne, and the 1 Wendigo. If you wanted to run 2 Winda, you can always take out the Wendigo. I just have it in here for the spot with our Shaddoll Wendy to fusion summon that card. But Winda is definitely good for its lockdown power and also for the fact that it cannot be destroyed by opponent's card effects. For more of the generic lineup that we run with the Super Polymerization plays to also make use of, the 1 Predaplant Dragostapelia, the 1 Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, the 1 Trivial Veritum, and the 1 Mud Dragon of the Swamp. If we end up losing Super Polymerization, it'll make these cards a little more difficult to summon out, but you could always replace this card if, like I say, if it does get hit, if it happens or not, with cards like Polymerization, just as more of a generic fusion play to be able to make these monsters still with all the different dark attribute monsters that we run. And then for the Link monsters, 1 the Dark Charmer Gloomy, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 IP Masquerena, and the 1 Nightmare Unicorn. I even considered running Baron de Fleur at one point with the special summon power that Falco could use with your El Shaddoll Construct, giving you a level 8 monster on the field to then tune with your Falco to go into that Synchro monster. If you wanted to try out that play, you could always drop one of the other fusion monsters that I run the deck to do so. And then as for some of the go-to plays in the deck, this is a real fusion setup kind of deck. So depending on what cards you may have those turns where you're ending up just setting a Shaddoll monster. But if you open up any of your other setup cards, like the Mathematician, then you can have the Mathematician send a Shaddoll monster of choice to the graveyard. It has to be level 4 or lower. You can have the Spell and Trap Destruction with the Dragon. You could have the Search off of Hedgehog all very useful, but still needing the option to then have the special summon as well, so you can send cards like Shaddoll Wendy to the graveyard, giving you that monster in your graveyard, while being able to use Wendy to special summon a Shaddoll monster from your deck in face down defense position. So you can even use it to summon out cards like your Shaddoll Beast, giving you a bigger powerhouse monster on the field to then use, or go for the Shaddoll Fusion play with the Mathematician and the Beast on the field to then summon out our bigger monsters like Shekanaga, and then utilizing the Shaddoll Beast to give you a draw into your hand as well off of that one play. If your opponent has a special summon monster from the extra deck and you activate your Shaddoll Fusion, being able to send that many more materials from your deck to the graveyard means you can send cards like your Trick Clown and then that other Shaddoll monster of choice. So if you send Squamata, you'll gain the additional send off of Squamata to then activate a different Shaddoll monster on a separate chain, but you'll still get your monster of choice summoned onto the field without having to use more resources, thanks to your opponent already having a special summon monster. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, I just wanted to try my hand at an update to the pure Shaddoll deck. I always have fun when I work with this fusion deck specifically. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.